name is Scott Hutchins, and I teach in the creative writing program. It's my great honor to be here tonight to introduce both our honored visitor, Walter Mosley, and his interlocutor, Mia Birdsong, his interviewer. This is a part of, so the McCoy Family Center for Ethics and Society has organized this event. It's part of their conversation this year on technology and human values. And so this is the third event we've had this year. We had Karen Joy Fowler, then Amy Bender, and now we're honored to welcome Walter Mosley. And I want to thank Joni Berry, who runs the McCoy Family Center for Ethics and Society, for organizing all of this. So if we could get a little round of applause for Joni. You know, we in creative writing have just had such a good time over the years partnering with the McCoy Center and Ethics and Society on war and now on technology and human values. So just wanted to go over a little bit about how the talk's going to work, and then I'll do introductions. The process for questions is going to be on cards. Hopefully you got a card and a pencil maybe coming in, and if not, you can ask for one. And then at some point in the conversation, Mia will say, now would be a good time to pass your cards to the aisle, and then you can pass them to the aisle. Someone will gather them, and then they'll be sort of collected and organized and sent up there, and so we'll work in that manner for questions. Does that make sense? No, same. Okay, good. So intros. So Mia Birdsong, closest to me, is a political activist, gripping speaker, and radical thinker who has spent more than 20 years fighting for the self-determination and pointing out the brilliant adaptations of everyday people. She has a TED Talk titled "The Story We Tell About Poverty Isn't True," which you can watch on YouTube, and which I highly recommend. I don't know, 45 million people have seen it, but you should be the next. And Mia is able, through her writing, speaking, and organization, to reframe entire conversations we have as a society around poverty, race, value, and work. She's an inaugural Ascend Fellow of the Aspen Institute and is just an enormously important voice today. Mia also has a lesser-known superpower in that she's a dedicated, insightful, and incisive reader of fiction. She's interviewed David Foster Wallace, John Irving, and Edwidge Danticat, and we are pleased she's able to be here today in conversation with Walter Mosley. Walter Mosley is one of the most versatile and admired writers in the country. He's the author of more than 56 critically acclaimed books, including the major best-selling mystery series featuring Easy Rawlins. Easy Rawlins is, I think it's fair to say, one of the seminal characters of our age. So Mosley has reinvented the frameworks of detective fiction. He's expanded its boundaries into new communities and new political inquiries. His work has been widely translated and includes literary fiction, political monographs, a young adult novel, lots of TV and film work I just learned about today, a wonderful book on writing called "This Is the Year You Write Your Novel," to be considered. And maybe less known, and one of the reasons we're so excited to have him here today, is that in this story biography is his interest in and dedication to science fiction and what science fiction can do as a way of telling stories about us today. He's written 14 acclaimed books in science fiction, including Blue Light, Futureland, Wave, 47, and many more. Among Mosley's many awards are an O. Henry Award, a Grammy, and a PEN America Lifetime Achievement Award. Please welcome Mia Birdsong and Walter Mosley.
Now I'll go up, right?
Yep.
Excuse me for going in front of you.
That's okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I keep on saying this, because when I was younger, if a black person got up in front of black people and said hello, everybody said hello. If a black person stood up in front of white people and said hello, everybody went, and that has changed, It's just like people, fist bumping and, high fives and white power, things like that, It's interesting. I'm supposed to. I was given an incredibly difficult thing. They'd say, "Well, we want you to come and talk." And usually, people want you to come talk. They want you to talk too long. They said, "Well, you have an hour and a half." And I said, "What am I going to say for an hour and a half?" But these people said 10 to 15 minutes. So, you know, and it's hard to actually say something in 10 to 15 minutes, especially if it's anything, you know, complex. But I'm talking about technology and humanity, basically. And it's funny because I got here today and this thing was in front of me, and I said, well, this thing is in front of me. I don't like it. Could you move it? And they said, no, it can't be moved. It's very difficult to, you know. It's an idea of, you know, human values and technology. The technology is going to be there in your life. So can you take this thing out of my bed? No, it's connected to your bed. If we take it out, your bed will be gone. But that's okay. I'm not, you know, it's just one of those examples about life and technology. So anyway, I'm just going to read this thing to you because, I mean, I have friends, you know, Cornel West, for instance, you know, he can just talk. You know, nobody knows what he said after he finishes talking. But while Cornel is talking, it's so cool. You know, it's like, damn, that was good last night. I said, what did he say? I don't remember, but it was good. And I'm going to try to be more like that. All right. I was asked to address you briefly here this evening to talk about my views and my work as they have to do with the intersection of technology and human values. This sounds like an easy enough task here, just 18 years over the borderline of the 21st century. And I suppose that many writers who come here to speak may indeed feel comfortable talking about their work and its importance because that work so often has to do with assumptions associated with the so-called objectivity of science and technology. That is to say, if you present an idea as an accepted fact, then any response you might form to bolster or oppose that fact takes on at least the partial veneer of objectivity, truth. For instance, it has been said that scientific discovery and its technological manifestations has the strong potential to make our lives easier, better. This by shortening the time it takes to accomplish those tasks connected to survival, while at the same time somehow increasing our sophistication through a matrix of ever more complex algorithms that allow us to see worlds beyond our limited senses, superstitions, and rote beliefs. So, armed with this truth, it's easy enough to talk about one's work because that work is built upon perceptions of a world that we all agree on. Even if we attack the assumptions about that world, we're still talking about the same, you know, firmament of truth. But fiction, or at least my brand of fiction, does not have the security of fact or truth. It does not have solid ground under it, but rather angry waters, like the ones that carried the slave ships that my ancestors' first experience of the full weight of the technology of the so-called New World. My brand of fiction comes out of Holocaust and bondage, out of the planned extinction of culture, language, and life itself. My fiction relies on the shifting sands of history, and as I have discovered in my 66 years in human form, any knowledge of human history is at best merely a gesture toward truth. We can't know our histories because we cannot know everything, partly because everything breaks down to the subatomic level, and also that postulated everything is always in flux. The child knows that her mother loves her, but has a simplistic, if instinctual, understanding of that bond. By the time the child becomes a woman, she understands a love that she no longer experiences through the passion and innocence of a child's eyes. So, I can talk about how slavery and racial hatreds have formed me and my work, but I wasn't a passenger on that long ago slave ship. I was not limited to some shtetl out past the fertile farmlands of the Goyim. I've been stopped by the police multiple times, had guns drawn on me, and called a nigger by law enforcement. But I'm not sure that these experiences are enough to justify my work to prove it. In this modern day, I'm not sure that any experience is enough to meet the scientific and technological standards of veracity. That said, I'll try to connect what I've done in my science fiction writing to address humanity and its domination by technology. For me, it all starts in 1977 with the breakout blockbuster Star Wars. Watching that film, I was transported by the advanced techniques used to make intergalactic travel and colonization seem possible. It was swashbuckling, literally sword-wielding, skin showing, and made crystal clear the delineation between good and evil. It was also an implied death warrant for all the so-called colored races of the one planet we really do live on. There were no people of color in the Star Wars future. None. It was not only a white world, but a white galaxy, maybe destined to become a white universe. There were aliens, of course, but none of these creatures had much power, not in the first film. Science fiction is less a predictive exercise than it is a preordinative one. That is, science fiction is one of the foundational building blocks in the creation of the future. Mr. Lucas was hard at work, consciously or not, creating a world where pesky minorities did not exist. This, of course, was nothing new. In most science fiction, the multiplicity of races and genders most often took the back seat to the white male domination and defense of humanity. But this was the 70s. We had ended the war in Vietnam, had made great advances through the civil rights movement. The National Organization for Women had been in existence for over a decade and had become a staple of American politics. And still, the only brother I could hope for was a disembodied voice. I began writing nearly a decade after my love for and revulsion at Star Wars. I didn't start writing science fiction until 20 years after the movie came out, but I never forgot what I had learned. My first book of speculative fiction was called Blue Light. And suppose that a billion years or so ago, a member of a planet-sized race of beings sensed Earth's potential to house and uniquely engender life. To this end, the being deposited a few 100 million tons of its reproductive material upon the planet. Over the eons, this scant material blossomed into a multiplicity of species, one of which was humanity. Sometime later, during the short-lived hippie movement, another silent behemoth passed close enough to Earth to perceive what its brother had wrought with its seed. Life, as we know it, for these meta-beings is merely foundational for their definition of living awareness. Motivation and survival instinct are only the frame for these divine space dwellers. The second being releases millions of rays of blue light, each a few seconds long. These rays hurtle toward Earth. Most of these lights are extinguished before they reach the planet. Most of the rest strike upon insouciant matter. But a few hundred of these data streams strike living matter, transforming those living beings into metaforms, designated to take evolution the next step toward the stars. The transformation is based on data carried by the light and the living receptacle through its mechanical, biological, and spiritual form. Also, not only human life is transformed by these night of blue lights. I wrote the book to play with creation myths, God and mortal life containing immortal souls. It was political inasmuch as many of the main characters, including the narrator, were of color. Where thou goes, so dost I. Your sins following you into infinity. My next book of science fiction was Futureland. It was no more political, but it wore the trappings of humanity's semi-social forms of cooperation. In Futureland, society could be mapped architecturally because cities had burrowed deep into the earth, and the greater part of the population, the working class, the poor, and unemployable, were relegated to places far underground. Down there, the unemployed were provided with basic foods and distractions. They have a place to sleep and titanium-clad laws that govern with complete equanimity. In Futureland, prisons are portable Kim wrappers bound around a convict's arm. These bonds can read your every urge and condition, then control you by release of the proper drug. One day, these wrist wrappers will be a prerequisite for all public employment. In Futureland, there's InfoChurch, owned and operated by the world's richest man. It trades vital information with its parishioners. In Futureland, Fira Jones is the first intergender heavyweight champion. In Futureland, corporate structure supersedes national borders by worldwide agreement. In Futureland, a group of radical white people is developing a virus that will seek out and eliminate all humans that aren't mostly white. They have a surprise in store for them. I've written 13 or 14 books that could be classified as science fiction, but I'll only talk about one other. That's my book 47. I was asked by HBO to write a new voiceover track for Patrick Chamoiseau's important film, Middle Passage. This film chronicled the progress of a slave ship from the west coast of Africa to the United States. It was as if someone had a video camera on the ship documenting every atrocity, humiliation, and death. I was happy to have my name associated with the film, but when I would go to parties given by and for intellectual Black New Yorkers, no one I talked to had seen more than the first 5 minutes. And why? Because it was just too damn depressing. Who wants to immerse themselves in their ancestors' humiliation, to imbibe mortification that only offered misery in life and an early death? Who wants to know that their culture was completely obliterated by their owners and that this degradation went on for centuries? Nobody. But we have to embrace who and what we are, where we came from, and how we got here. We have to know the beauty of our survival and that we were among the first to come here after the original settlers, of course. We were the builders and the architects, the innovators and the artists. So I decided to write a story about a slave boy, 47, and an alien in human form, Tall John. This was to be a young adult novel that adults could read, an optimistic tale where our main character, a young slave in Georgia, would survive slavery and thrive as a free soul. That way I could talk about all the horror of slavery, but still leave sparks of heroism and hope. There's more. There's always more. Even after we're dead, our words are transformed by the future and its technologies and techniques. What we believe in, and what is true beneath these two is always, always changing. And so I have just one other thing to say. When I was younger, I attended a PhD program in political theory at UMass Amherst. I studied Freud and Marx, Darwin and Einstein, the little I could understand of him. I thought of these thinkers as the school of suspicion because they dealt in unseen, unknown, and unsuspected forces that ultimately formed who and what we are, without our knowledge or conscious consent. I concentrated on a few dozen thinkers, but I'd like to mention two that always return to me. That's Jacques Ellul and Louis Mumford. Both men lived from the beginning of the 20th century through to the end. They were both sociologists, and both spent most of their time considering how technology and its subsequent techniques form, reform, and often deform society and its relations. We believe that we're in control of the hammer, but in another sense, that mallet is wielding us, forming us, making us who we are as much as, and maybe even more than the opposable thumb. Science is also a preordinative art. We are being created by what we make. One day, the human race might be the intersplicing of 1,000 species of DNA, or maybe the haphazard advancement of evolution will become mechanized, creating machines in the image of our souls. Thank you.
So, we're going to get to the technology and humanity in a second.
Okay.
But I want to back up a little bit. So, you were a computer programmer.
I was.
And you were inspired. Well, I think there are two stories that I've heard about how you were inspired to write. One of them was you reading Alice Walker's The Color Purple.
Uh-huh.
The other is the story that your father told you about a story he wrote about a cowboy that he submitted for publication.
Uh-huh.
Can you tell that story? I don't want to tell your daddy's story.
Well, I will tell that story, but,
Okay.
but I mean, it was neither of those stories. I mean,
Okay.
both of those things. You know, I read Alice Walker's Color Purple, and I went, wow, I could write this. I mean, not that I thought it was all easy or anything, but it was language that, you know, so, people could say ain't, you know, people could say, what's that nigga doing? You know, it's like, and it would be okay, you know, because like, you know, you're kind of taught in school, you know, by like kind of for lack of a better term, a white sensibility that
Yes.
people talk in a certain way, act in a certain way, do certain things, you know. And it is true that my father, when he was a kid, wrote a story, sent it to a publisher in Chicago, and they never answered him. But then, you know, my father used to steal these books out of this store, and one day he stole a book and he read the story, and it was his story. My father would always tell me, I stole the book, but I always brought him back. Now, of course, he didn't, but he didn't want me to go out
Think that it was
stealing
okay,
things.
right.
Yeah. So in the back of my mind, you have, my father's story, you have Alice Walker, my experience with the color purple. But in the foreground, it's just, I was looking for, I'm from California. Some of you people understand, people in California. If you're 80 years old, you're an 80-year-old woman retiring, because, we retire later now. You're retiring at 80 in Iowa. What you're going to do is after you retire, spend time with your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. In California, if you ask a woman at 80, she's retiring, she says, well, I'm very flexible. I'm thinking about going into the ballet, And, fuck if in 3 years later, at 83, she's not performing at the White House with her, it's like there's a notion, that you can do whatever you want if you're from California. And that's what happened. I was I don't know, like 34, 35. I was working at Mobil Oil. I was programming. I didn't realize what thieves they were back then, or I didn't care. Anyway, I stopped writing code and I wrote a sentence on hot, sticky days in southern Louisiana. The fire ants swarmed, and I said, "Wow, that's good. That sounds like the beginning of a book." And it has to be fiction because I've never been to southern Louisiana or seen a fire ant. So, I could do that.
So this California as being kind of this place where you can do whatever you want, right? So my understanding too is that like both of your parents from very different places moved to California because of that lack of boundaries.
I guess. I'm not sure if it was. My father moved here. My father had gone to World War II with about, he was from Fifth Ward, Houston, Texas, which nobody wants to live in Fifth Ward, Houston, Texas, that my father lived in. George Foreman lived in it too, and you wouldn't want to live in his either. So he lived there, and if they drafted him, he finally went. It was about 100 black soldiers from Texas, from Houston. And, like 90 of them came back, and the 10 who died, died, either from mistake or disease or something like that. Nobody died, getting shot. But when he got back to Fifth Ward, everybody he knew was dead. Like, it was safer in the largest war in history than it was at home in his own bed in Fifth Ward, Houston, Texas. He said, what you gonna do today? He said, well, I hope I don't get killed, So that's why he moved. And my mother moved because a lot of my mother's Jewish, a lot of her relatives had moved out there, and she came to stay there,
All right, so you at 35, 34 become a writer.
Yeah, well, I start writing it.
Right, yes. And you focused on fiction.
Yeah.
And particularly crime novels. And then this.
No, not particularly. I wrote Gone Fishing first, which was Easy and Mouse, but it was coming of age.
Right.
And here's what they said. The publishers they said, well, it's very good, but it's not it's not commercial, because white people don't read about black people, black women don't like black men, and black men don't read. So who's going to read your book? And it's a funny thing about truth. It wasn't true, except it was true because they said it was true.
Exactly.
So I wrote that book. So then I wrote a mystery, and they did that thing. Said, well, we'll buy 2 of them. And I said, well, I only have 1. But they said, well, we'll buy 2. And I go, okay. And so they want to keep me there in fiction. It's capitalism. Capitalism, you do a specific job. You put the left front tire on the Pinto.
Yep.
That's what you do. You can't come in one day and say you want to put in the automatic transmission. You have to have a whole re-education for that. So and that's why I change publishers so often.
So was shifting to writing science fiction putting the painting the Pinto instead of putting the left front tire on?
Absolutely. I wrote the book. Oh, you may ask.
No, well, I was going to say, what I want to know, what was there a creative restlessness? What happened that you were I need to write some science fiction now?
Well, you don't want to keep on writing about the same character again and again. You guys, anybody here who reads mysteries, you read a mystery and it's a great character, and they read another one, it's wonderful, a few people get away with it. Simenon did, Rex Stout did. But, most times, after a while, it just gets boring. So, oh my God, they're the same age, but it's 20 years later, but they're still doing the same things. And, what? And you know, so like I'd write 4 or 5 Easy Rawlins novels. I said, well, it's time to do something else. And you know, and I wanted to, you know, kind of explore the notion of the soul. And you know, mystery's not going to do that. So I wrote Blue Light, and I showed it to my publisher, Norton, W.W. Norton. They said, oh no, we're not publishing that. And then they were so shocked that I went to another publisher. I said, if you publish Blue Light, then I'll give you an Easy Rawlins novel. And that's what I've done ever since. You know, I go, yeah, I don't know. I have like 100 publishers, you know.
So
I hate them.
has it, well, you know, when I think about what you just said about, you know, them saying like, don't nobody want to read about black men, do you feel like that's still what publishers say and you just kind of are an exception, or do you think that that's changed some?
Well, you know, it was an interesting notion because, you know, people say things, they're not always based, you know, on something, you know, false. Like, you know, like if you're like from some poor subgroup and people say you have sex all the time, well, yeah, you do because you're poor. What else are you going to do? You know, I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, they have sex all the time, but it's because they're poor. You know, it's not because, you know, they don't want to do something else. Like, you know, so, you know, I mean, they were right because all other fiction that included black men either misrepresented or insulted black men. And so black men didn't want to read it. They said, oh, no, I don't want to read that book. You know, in the beginning, a lot of black men didn't come to my readings. But, you know, now a lot of black men read my books. Black men come up to me and say, Mr. Mosley, it's good you read all those books because you're the only person I read, you know. And it's like, I understand that because, you know, I write about black male heroes. Who writes about black male heroes? Nobody. Ralph Ellison didn't. Or Richard Wright didn't, you know. You know, they were protagonists and very good
But not
protagonists.
heroes.
Yeah, but not heroes. No.
Do you see that changing at all?
I don't know.
Either in literature or in like other forms of media.
Well, you know, I don't think in film, you know, it's in film you either have like Shaft, you know, it's like he's just not real.
Right.
You know, it's fun, but he's just not real. You know, or you have people who are not, they're black, but it doesn't matter that they're black. To be
Like
a
Will
black,
Smith's characters
yeah,
are often,
to be a black male hero,
right.
that's like that's a difficult thing.
What about like Luke Cage?
What about Luke Cage?
I'm just asking if like,
What about
if you
Luke
feel
Cage?
like
You
that.
want me to attack my friend? my friend's
Black
the head writer
Lightning.
of Luke Cage. And he put my books all in. It was very nice.
I'm not saying that, I noticed that. I'm not saying like, are they perfect?
No.
But
I mean, they're superheroes. I mean, please. You know, I mean, honestly. You know, it's like I got to be a superhero to be
In order to
a
be,
hero.
yes.
You know, it's like I got
Fair
to, you know,
enough.
it's like, you know, I mean, you know, it's the thing, you know, that, you know, I mean, there's every once in a while, you know, I think that in film, you have it. Every once in a while in books, you have it, you know, but it's rare.
Yep.
And it's, you know, it's problematic because, you know, I mean, listen, America doesn't like black men.
black people.
Because black men are dangerous. I said, he hates me. And, you know, you're right about that, you know. You're not making it up. Yeah, they do hate you, but there's a reason, you know. And, you know, and so making that person a hero, you know, you might lose your daughter or your wife or, you know, both, you know. We're both going to live with Jackson. Say what?
All right, we're jumping all over the place, but back to science fiction. No,
I've been talking about heroes.
we can talk about here some more, but the shift, I like jumping all over the place. So the shift from focusing primarily on crime novels and then doing more speculative fiction, more science fiction. What
And
is
literary
it?
fiction and nonfiction. But go, yeah.
But specifically the science fiction.
And erotica.
Yes,
People
I
never say
know.
that. And erotica, yeah.
I know. I read that a few days ago. Not the book, but about it.
Yes, of course.
We'll do that. I'll do that later. What is there something that you get to explore or experience in writing science fiction that you don't in the other forms of writing that you do?
Well, I think that, and like I was saying in my little talk there, is I think that if you don't write science fiction that includes black people in America and elsewhere, then we don't have a future. The future that gets created is a future we don't live in, and we don't imagine, and we don't create, And it's like, like for instance, if I was like writing a book, and say, I'm writing a book, it's about a black man who becomes president in 1830. So, well, that's science fiction, right? I mean, right there, it's science fiction. If you write anything about black people doing something like that, it's science fiction. It used to be that having a black president was science fiction, and I think it has become that again. It's like, wow, there'll never be another black president in the United States, because he was too good.
He wore a tan suit, though. What, I know what the kind of like black science fiction or Afrofuturism does for black folks in terms of writing us into a future. Do you think there's also something it offers more broadly that like white science fiction doesn't?
I don't know, because really of the writers, of the prose writers, science fiction writers are the smartest ones. And they do extraordinary work, I mean, really, I'm right now, I'm rereading Roger Zelazny. It's just, wow, like it's just so good. And all the way back, I mean, it's like, really all the way back to Jules Verne. Jules Verne invented the 20th century. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I think that a black science fiction writer will not be doing anything different than a white science fiction writer. It's just that as he or she brings in those characters, from that diverse experience, it opens things in a way that the white science fiction writers might not be doing.
Right.
But that's not the whole. That's not saying that there's something wrong with Brian Aldiss or Ursula Le Guin or
Sure.
whoever. But it's that it's not their problem. It's ours.
I guess, so you wrote in your memoir this idea that black folks were the kind of only believable ambassadors for world peace. And you specifically wrote, "We know what the rest of the world feels about American rhetoric on democracy because we have been lied to about freedom and carry a similar rage in our hearts." So when I think about the future that gets written with science fiction, and this idea that there's something that black people uniquely understand about democracy, about freedom, about truth, I wonder if there is actually something that we, in the creation of future worlds, bring that white people don't, aside from just our presence.
Well, our experience is like we are the first modern property of capitalism. We, were the automatons who went out and picked the cotton and raised the kids, and and as Malcolm X says, "Master, is we sick?" It's that incredible identity, and the idea that my body, my life, my child is the property of somebody else. And that's how I live. Having gone through that experience, we understand what the rest of the world feels when America, kind of butts in. They say, well, yeah, but it don't make no sense, which is why, you could have a boxer get in front of America and say, well, ain't no Viet Cong ever called me nigger, and the whole country went, yeah, right. Even people who didn't understand what he was talking about understood what he was talking about. And it's like nobody else could say that. Lyndon Johnson's, well, he didn't have the vocabulary to say it. And so I think that there is an incredible knowledge and experience from Black America dealing, with forces so much greater than ourselves, being property, and still today being property, in prisons, in ghettos, in the lowest level of jobs, yeah.
What, when you think about the future,
Yeah.
what do you, so Futureland, like when you were just describing it, right? That's not super, it doesn't sound very far into the future. That's not like hundreds of years from now. Some of those things feel very resonant now.
Yeah.
So when you envision, think about what's happening now, and you think about what might be happening in 10 or 20 years. What are the things that, when it comes to technology, when it comes to media, that you are most concerned about, or kind of capture your imagination the most?
Well, the thing that upsets me the most in my country is scientific literacy. People actually don't understand. Before World War I, all the way back, knowledge doubled every century. That means you have 3 or 4 generations of families that lived under the same technology. So, they had the same values, they did the same things, life was the same. Back then, if a young man would say to his father, "I know better than you do, I'm going to go out and do it on my own." And then, 10 years later, he'd come back and say, "Dad, you are always right, because this is the way things work." But now, after World War I, knowledge doubles over the period of World War I. And then it goes up and down and up and down. But around now, depending on how you define knowledge, it doubles everywhere, between every 10 to 14 months. So we know twice as much every year. So now when the son says to the father, he says, "I know better than you." And the father says, "No, you should do what I say." And then the son goes off, and 10 years later, the father comes back to the son and says, "Son, you were right. Everything is the way you said it." Because things change so quickly, And if you don't know that, if you don't think that, if it's not part of your heart, because we live in an Einsteinian world, but we still think like Newton, right? I mean, that's who we are. We're thinking, well, there's, you do this, and then this happens, the thing about the satellites? Like, the satellites, when the GPS didn't work at first, didn't work. And finally, one day, somebody realized it's because of what Einstein said. He says, time travels differently up there. It's in a different place, and also it's moving faster. So we have to have an algorithm to figure out.
That, corrects for that difference.
Oh, my God. I just but, none of us know that, and we don't see it in everyday life. And if we don't see it in everyday life, life is going to crush us.
So I feel like there's this tension in terms of the access to information, right? Because we have more access to, I can look up anything, right?
Yeah.
And we have less ability to discern what's accurate. And Jacques Ellul, who you mentioned, saw the media as an example of technology exerting control over human destiny. And he wrote, in 1962, "In fact, it is a fact that excessive data do not enlighten the reader or the listener, they drown him. He cannot remember them all or coordinate them or understand them. If he does not want to risk losing his mind, he will merely draw a general picture from them. And the more facts supplied, the more simplistic the image." And this was 1962.
Right.
And I think about, the public did not have access to the internet then. And I think about what this means now. And so this thing that you're saying is a problem in terms of scientific literacy. Do you feel like there's a solution to that?
Well, I think that if enough people took it to heart that was the case, I think there would be a solution. I don't know if I have the solution.
You don't think we care enough about it, though?
Well, I don't think we know. It doesn't seem to be an important thing. I tell people, well, knowledge doubles every 12 months, and they go, yeah, okay. And then that's it. It doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Nobody, really, been very few people I've ever said it to who even think anything about it, And I think that's a really big problem. And it's a giant problem if you think back to the 15th century, when you would have a house, and and there would be a shelf of books, and that would be all the books that are important in the world. Well, there's the Odyssey, and there's Dante, and there's and there's whatever there is. And you would read those books over and over and over and over again. Now, people come to me and they say, well, I just read War and Peace. And I said, well, how many times? They said, once. And I said, well, you didn't really read it right. You got to read it a few times before you get into it. So, man, I ain't got time for that. And I said, well, yeah, that's the problem, right? The problem is time.
It's also, though, quantity of, do you read War and Peace or do you read something else?
But it doesn't matter.
You're just saying,
Yeah.
like, whatever you pick, you need to.
You got to
Like,
know
get
that
into
shit.
it.
Yeah, right. And somehow know how to trade that. So like
Right.
like we were talking about bees earlier. Each bee has a job, right? And you do that job. You
We
know,
were talking about
it's like,
bees earlier.
And it's it's like that's. I think that, and I don't know the answer to this question, but I know that we need to know how to work together, and humans aren't very good at that, We're not really social creatures. We're like semi-social creatures,
Really, you think that?
Oh, yeah.
What? Say more about that. Why do you think we're not really social creatures?
We're like a real social creature. It's like an ant or a bee or a termite. They like, even
Right.
migrating geese are more social than we are. Because they know how to do that shit. Or fish that go in
Right.
schools.
And
you
a
know?
bee, yes, like a bee is not an individual.
Well, they have their
There's no
jobs.
individual in
Yeah,
a
they have their
honeybees,
jobs.
yes.
Me, I'm thinking, shit, well, he the boss, but maybe if I kill his ass, maybe I'll be the boss. He said, well, he might be the boss, but I fuck his wife, I mean, it's like, you have things that you're thinking about.
Right.
That bring you into conflict. It's not social.
Or just perhaps like, I don't want to share my bathroom with other people, or.
Right. I don't want to, and I can be in charge. It's not just that I don't want to
Do
share.
you think?
I can be in
this is?
charge.
But this is. You think this is like human nature for thousands of years, or do you feel like this is a more?
No, I think
Like, I
it's-
mean, I think about like.
I think
you know,
hippopotamuses are like that too. You mess around with a hippopotamus's wife, he gonna bite you, and they got those big teeth.
All right. Well, they're human beings, right? Like I mean, I feel like there's a pretty substantial body of research that suggests we need like contact with other human beings, right? We
Oh
need
yeah,
each
we're
other.
semi-social.
Okay, so it's not that we're like total assholes.
No, like even the least social creatures have sex. You know what I mean? Like because they have to.
Sure.
They have to have sex. I mean, like spiders are not really social. You come up to a female like tarantula, she bite off your head if you're a male tarantula.
Yes.
But if she feels like mating, it's okay. She won't bite your head off till after
Right.
the mating process.
Yes.
There's that moment.
But we're not tarantulas. We're a little more
Yeah,
social.
we're kind of like that, I mean, really, we're really bad. I mean, when you think of the amount of people you read got killed in the newspaper any day, I'm saying Jacques Ellul would agree with me on that. Like, it's like, why that one got killed, and that one got killed, and this one, and why did this one kill that one, and this one killed 20, and that one, it's like there's an anger and there's a kind of a need for violence that we have. I mean, it's there.
I think that's innate to human beings, not
Yeah.
like our particular.
Yeah, and no less than it is with tigers. I mean, I said, damn, I said, look at that tiger over there. What are you looking at me for? I said, I don't like the way you smell. I mean, they do that. They do it, and we have to learn how to work with that. We have intelligence. We have to learn how to
Right.
work with that, I mean, some people have learned better over time, There's not a lot of violence among the pygmies.
Right.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think that they are I had an argument with a friend of mine. He was like, yeah, I love my friend, but he was saying like the West is the most advanced because of our science. And I said, well, you mean like the air conditioner? He said, yeah, like the air conditioner. I said, well, do you know how to build one? And he said, no. I said, well, do you know how to make one work? And he said, no. And I said, if it broke, do you know how to fix it? And he goes, well, no, I had to call somebody. And I said, so what makes you more sophisticated than the Aborigines in Australia is that you can flick the switch and turn on the air
Or buy
conditioner.
one, right,
You know?
yes.
And it's like, and it's like a thing that, that our capitalism and our specialization, I think have put us in a bad position in the situation. And I don't
So
think that we're happy.
they like accentuate some of that stuff.
But I don't think we're happy. I mean, I don't think
No.
we're happy in this life. But we have to pretend like we are.
So, okay, so going back to kind of the apocalypse and kind of dystopian futures,
Yeah.
well, let me say, so there's the like, shit goes down if you can't build an air conditioner. I mean, whatever, you don't need no air conditioner. You can't hunt or forage or protect yourself. There are all these things, there are all these skills we don't have because we rely on technology for things. And at the same time, so that sounds like a disaster on some level. But at the same time, I think that there is an opportunity to create something different. And I guess when you think about dystopian futures, is there something hopeful in there, in your mind?
I'm not sure if that's the question I would answer.
All right, what's the question that you?
I mean, honestly, I mean, like,
Interview yourself.
because I could go into that question, but I'm a really bad poet, but I write poems. I wrote a poem once, and it was really bad, but like the content was good. Like a guy walks into a room and the light comes on, and the room says, "Hello, John," And then 12,000 years ago, there's some 12, 13-year-old kid, it's really cold and it's really raining, but he has this oil bag and he pulls it out, and from the oil bag he's able to make a fire, and from the fire he has light and warmth, and he's taking care of himself. The juxtaposition of those two things is really interesting to me, because it is really technologically sophisticated to walk in a room, light comes on, the room recognizes you, says hello, whatever. But what are you? The room is like great, but you're just a name that walked in the room. And this kid, life is very hard, it's very difficult, he could die. Probably will die sometime soon from something. But when you look at those things, if we're able to think about those things in creating our lives, if we're able to make lives for ourselves, what would that look like? And I don't know the answer to that.
Right.
But that becomes the thing, because it's a very, if you start to judge technology not on how much money it makes, which is mostly how we do it, but what kind of human beings it's making. Because every time you have technological advance, humanity changes. And it's almost impossible when, people looking in the past at, 100 years, people go, you look at them and go, wow, that's awful. And they look at us and say the same thing, Ooh, that's terrible. You live like that?
I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but before I do that, if you all have questions that you've written on your cards, I want you to pass them to the aisles so they can get collected.
Hey, they're afraid of us talking. Yes.
So what does give you hope? What do you feel hopeful about?
It's interesting.
Or is that not relevant? Is that not the question that you would ask?
Did I insult you?
No, you didn't at all. No, I'm just making fun of you now.
I think that, for me, I don't know how the rest of the people think, but I think that optimism is a state of mind that doesn't actually have logic to it. Yeah, I'm optimistic.
Is that true of pessimism too?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm optimistic. Because I can see that there's people are able to make decisions and choices. You remember the one of the first hip hop groups, the Fat Boys. You remember this?
Fat Boys are
way
back.
Long ago.
Yep.
And the Fat Boys, what happened was they were a bunch of fat kids who wanted to have one of those machines that make sounds, but they didn't have any money. So they said, but wait a second, if we get a microphone and spit in it, then we could make those sounds. And they started doing that, and they became gigantic, other than how big they were also gigantic. And it was kind of like you look at something like that and say, damn, there's all kinds of stuff that we can do just if we just give ourselves a chance. And I think that, but the problem, you have a place like Stanford where you have a lot of people who have a great deal of intelligence and a lot of resources that give all kinds of information. But then you have all those people coming and say, well, listen, I could pay you $250,000 a year starting salary to come over here and do this. And then you think, well, shit, I'm going to do that. But which is great, except for the fact that anybody who can pay you that much money is concentrating on making money on what you're doing. And if you do something that makes our lives better, that doesn't necessarily make money.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we have some questions?
We have
Not
lots.
yet. We don't have questions yet. I'm going to keep asking. What is the question that you would want to answer?
Oh my God.
Okay, let's talk about. All right, let's go to Star Wars because we didn't really get into Star Wars.
Okay. Yeah.
So you have a critique of Star Wars
Yeah.
and the future that it lays out. Where have you seen? So there's the critique that basically they know black people in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Where do you see science fiction happening that's in the movies or in I mean, there's Black Panther, of course, and kind of comic book genres.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see people creating futures that are more inclusive and diverse and, I mean, and really realistic?
Well, you know, I'm not sure that I need science fiction writers to answer those questions. I need them to, I need them to come up with you know, characters and interesting things. Harry Harrison wrote a series of books called the Death World Trilogy. Harry Harrison's a wonderful writer. He's very funny, and it's a world that's evolution was all connected, and it all worked against these humans who wanted to colonize the world. So the plants and the animals all became more and more vicious and powerful to defeat these humans, and the humans were becoming more and more powerful to fight them off. And it was just, and you know, and in the end, humanity is destroyed by nature that doesn't want to be colonized by them. And you know, just like if you something like that you read, you go, wow, this is really interesting to understand the metaphor, the meaning, the power, and to go out, like in my first thing in Blue Light, you know, well, you know, we're like cells to these great creatures, you know, floating through the universe. There's so much more for us to become and to be and to have, and to give us things to imagine, to think about, to understand, you know. I think that is much more important than actually answering our problems. You know, we can answer our own problems, but we need to think about them. And which is one of the problems with people reading science fiction. They look at it as escape. You know, are people teaching it? You know, well, it's escape, it's fun, it's heroic. No, it's actually the only way that we're going to survive. And once you start thinking of it like that, you got to go, wow, you know. Then I've got to pay attention to this shit.
I think any kind of, I mean, I feel like the civil rights movement was an act of speculative fiction, right? We're like imagining something different. Well, social movements in general.
Listen, it's speculative fiction to think that there will be like, you know, two black people sitting in front of our audience at an Ivy League school talking about ideas.
Exactly.
You know, I said, damn, yeah, that's speculative fiction
Totally.
right there. You know, they would be standing on the sides serving water.
Exactly.
You know, he has questions.
You have questions? All right. You have good ones? Let's see. All right.
Can I have more?
Okay. I'm gonna discern a little bit more.
Uh-oh. Whose question was that? You should put little marks on the back so you could tell.
Oh, I like this one. If you could eliminate one inventor, or like, you know, kind of, or maybe a piece of technology that exists today, what would it be and why?
Eliminate a piece of technology.
Or a person that invented a technology. That's a little darker though, so.
Well, you know.
What would you get rid of?
Eliminating them. You know, it's you kind of have to want to go after Edison. Mm-hmm. You know, because of Edison's incredibly capitalistic approach
Because he was an asshole.
to inventions. Yes. Well, not just that he was an asshole, because a lot of people are assholes.
No, but I mean, like,
but
like
yes.
morally, like,
Yeah.
problematic.
And, you know, I mean, it's not just that he killed that elephant, but also that you know that he made the beauty of scientific discovery into property. You know, and that's how we're living with it today. So other than Tesla, who's saying, "Oh my God, look, I can make clouds," you know, it's like, oh no, I own everything, and in owning it, I will make you do a thing that's not as good for you.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also not necessarily make the technology that is actually the most efficient or best. If you can capitalize on
Right.
it, then it doesn't
Exactly.
really matter.
Yeah.
All right, Edison's out. Oh. Please never stop writing. That's the preamble to this question.
Well, that's good.
But do you anticipate retiring? And what keeps you writing?
Well, I retire every night, you know, and then I wake up in the morning, you know. But no, I mean,
That's like a total dad joke.
Yeah, but no, it's like if I listen, there might be someday, that I'll stop writing. There might be.
Is there?
But, I mean, I have no plans and no desire to do that,
Is there a path that you could have imagined taking besides becoming a writer?
Not that I'd be happy with, no.
So this is the only thing you've ever wanted to, well, not ever, but it's the only
No,
thing
I didn't.
you want to
I
do
didn't
right
even
now.
want to
You
become
didn't
a
want
writer
to do
until I was
this.
in my mid-30s, but I went,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm from
And
California.
now
I
you're
should
like,
be a
this
writer.
is my thing. This one is, I really resonate with your statement that Black people are the best ambassadors for peace. How do you suggest we begin to execute that role? This is from someone from a younger generation.
Well, I think that I think it's how we imagine ourselves, and I think that a lot of people, that we're so oppressed economically and also by the government and by the police that it's hard for us to imagine being something else. This is the kind of nice thing about it is about being, and when I say Jewish, I mean, I have to be really clear about this. I mean, I'm Jewish, my mother's side of the family, and I'm Black, and when I was young and my parents were young and we would get together with all the older members, Blacks and Jews saw their lives the same. They were a different race. They were forced to live in certain neighborhoods. They were hung and burned. They had their money stolen.
Yep.
And every once in a while people came around and just attacked them. And there was an idea of having a cultural awareness that brought everybody together and said, well, it doesn't really matter what you think because we can make it through this. And the great thing about being Jewish is the Jews never lost their culture. The most terrible thing for Black people in America is our cultures were obliterated. And so the imagination of who we are and where we are and where we're going, is all based on this false estimation of us from America itself.
Yes. Though I think that part of the thing that's amazing about us is that, our cultures were mostly obliterated, but we maintained enough of them to create an entirely new culture.
No, we created America.
Yes.
But that
from the remnants of...
that creation is not something that we celebrate. We do something like we create gospel and move to blues. We create blues and we move to to rhythm and blues. We create that and we move to rock and roll. I mean, and we let things go. It's not something that we like hold on to, which is a beautiful thing, except in a capitalist culture, somebody else ends up owning it.
Yes.
And so what happens is that we lose who we are. And so the thing is how do we create an identity and an ownership over that identity? I think, and I mean, I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that that's the most important thing,
So this is not the what would you eliminate question, but what do you think has been the greatest technological advancement in the last 10 years?
Wow.
And let's think about technology broadly, right? Not just what would happen in Silicon Valley.
Well, I think the most important, because a lot of people keep talking about, the Terminator, and one day,
The machines
the
taking
computer's
over.
just going to say, hey, wait, we're going to take charge now, And I kind of like computers and that kind of mechanical technology, but I'm most interested in how deeply we've gone into DNA. And
Let's talk about that.
and if it's a dangerous thing partially because of capital and you're saying, well, how do I make money on this? How do I produce on this? But if you did it much more like in a religion, like saying, wow, rather than I'm reading the Torah or the Quran, I'm actually reading the genetic code. And I'm wondering, well, what does this say? What does that say? There's an incredible beauty to that and a potential for sophistication if we believe that it is greater than we are. And so understanding, reading DNA, which I think, the scientists who do it actually do think that. And of course, a lot of scientists who do that are kind of hacks. But the people who are most the people who are really understanding it.
Like the Human Genome Project folks.
Yeah, then that it becomes really, wow, elephants have more folds in their brains than I do, so they remember more. Wow, that's kind of cool. Like, just to kind of work with that.
Yeah.
You don't even have to change things. You just have to understand it.
So it's just like the kind of fascination and amazed by like understanding more about who we are and who we share the earth with, as opposed to like 23andMe, like finding out, I'm German and I thought I was Swedish and now I'm going to wear lederhosen instead of eating meatballs, which is ridiculous because that doesn't actually change your identity.
Right, it doesn't.
Yeah, and obviously
it's
the danger that comes with a private company owning your genetic information.
Well, there's that. Yeah.
Yes. So, and you probably don't have an answer to this, but I'm asking you anyway. When you think about this tension between the science that exists and the way that market kind of takes over and tries to make money off of it or capitalize it or do harm to us versus the things that can be beautiful or even beneficial about it. I think I'm going to answer the question,
Okay.
which is that partly what I heard you saying in the beginning was that we actually have to care. Right? Like when you say to people that the rate of information kind of the way it grows now versus 100 years ago, and that people are kind of like, okay, whatever about it, that there is this kind of lack of interest or caring about scientific literacy, which then basically allows all these things to be capitalized on as opposed to us kind of having some morals or values around them.
And asking questions, because you don't even have to have a pre-existent moral set of rules. Someone comes up to you, you're graduating from Stanford, and somebody comes up to you and says, I'm going to pay you $350,000 a year to tie knots because you're really good at tying knots. And you have to say, okay, well, so why are you going to pay me that money?
What you going to do with my knots?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, where is that going? What does that mean? What's happening there? And, to be able to say to tell everybody here, you need to say that. You don't just say, well, I took the money because it's really good and blah, 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 It's like, what are you going to do with it? And what does it mean? What does my life mean? What does my work mean? And how's it, and what is my connection to it once it's done? Which I think that every scientist should be saying that. They say, because right now you go work for Pfizer, right? And they just take your shit, and they're making all kinds of money on it. They're doing all kinds of shit with it, and you have nothing to say about it. Like that's. And it's pretty much celebrated in the university. I'm not saying this university, but most universities, they celebrate the fact that you can make a lot of money and make things, but you don't own.
Own them, right?
Or that you don't have say over.
What are you doing next? Just give us a little.
Oh, I have a book coming out. I have a book coming out in September. It's called John Woman. I've been working on it forever.
This is the one you've been working on for 20 years.
20 years, yeah. And it's about a deconstructionist historian. It's about a guy who's, when he's young, his mother's kind of crazy and left him. His father's really sick but really brilliant and teaches him a lot. And in the meanwhile, he in trying to do his father's job and save his father, he gets in a fight with this guy and he kills the guy. And he's smart enough to hide the body in a way that nobody finds it. But as soon as his father dies, what he does is, his name is Cornelius Jones, but he changes his name to John Woman, and he completely recreates his persona, his history, everything. Nothing is true, but it is true because he says it's true, and which is everything about history. It's like Richard III. Richard III was a bad guy up until they found him in that parking lot like a few years ago, right? Like he was a bad guy, but now all of a sudden he's a good guy. He was helping our kind. And, it's just like history doesn't stay still. It changes. What I was saying in the talk, every day, as time goes by, history changes. History changes every day. What happened? What did they do? What did it mean? What will it mean? And it changes in different ways. And I really wanted to write about that. So, and I think it's interesting enough. There's sex and violence, and
Totally.
but it's a very literary novel. And that's the next. It's coming out
September.
from Grove Atlantic in September. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Walter Mosley.
Thank you.